Welcome to another episode of Yalla, the podcast of Jewish students brought to you by the Union of Jewish Students of the UK and Ireland. I'm Samantha, the Campaigns and Inclusion Officer. Femi Otitoju is here today, and she is a pioneering activist, diversity consultant, and trainer with a career spanning over 4 decades. A champion for equality, inclusion, and social justice, Femi has been at the forefront of feminist, LGBT, and anti-racism activism since the late 1970s. Her work has left a lasting impact on grassroots movements, corporate structures, and public institutions, making her one of the most influential figures in the UK's fight for diversity and inclusion. In fact, in 2010, Femi featured in the independent Pink list of the 100 most influential gay and lesbian people in Britain. As the founder of Challenge Consultancy, she has played a pivotal role in transforming workplace cultures, advising global corporations, universities, and government bodies on tackling discrimination and implementing meaningful change. Beyond her consultancy work, Femi has dedicated her life to activism, helping to found the UK's first Black lesbian group, volunteering for the London Lesbian and Gay Switchboard during the AIDS crisis, and contributing to landmark feminist and LGBT publications. Today, Femi's work centres on improving the everyday lives of a broad range of people facing systematic disadvantage by tackling unconscious bias and addressing inequalities in employment and service delivery. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here.
To start, could you tell us how your early experiences have shaped your path and who some of the most instrumental figures in your life has been to sort of shape your worldview?
I think getting involved in activism started really early. As a child, I was fostered in Worthing, which made me one of the only Black children in the whole town. So my foster mother she seemed to get it. She was a young white woman, but she completely seemed to get what it would be like to be a young Black kid in Worthing, and was just really helpful in saying things like, be really good, because if you're bad, they'll say it's because you're Black. It's not just because you're naughty. My own mother was also very instrumental. She was here alone in her late 20s, early 30s with a very young baby, and she had to deal with the difficulties of finding work and being not having responsibility, not legally being able to, for example, get a passport for her child because she didn't have the father present to sign the application. So it all started incredibly early, and then school, but maybe we'll talk about that later.
How would you define feminism, and how has your understanding of it evolved over the years?
I think feminism is a very simple concept, and like a lot of firmly held beliefs, it's less than just an intellectual thing, it's more a way of life. And I think feminism is about dedicating energies, policies, and just a mindset really to the equality of people across the sexes. I think it's as simple as that.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess moving on from sort of your experiences growing up, what was your first step into activism? What pushed you into sort of taking on these campaigning roles?
The first step to activism was probably when at school, I think that would have been 1975, when the Sex Discrimination Act was passed. It was the Sex Discrimination Act was passed. And our school gave us all a little badge, a little brooch with love, with an equal symbol on it, and explained to us what that meant, how important that was for us in a girls' school. So that was probably my first step. And then later on, we had little groups at school. It gave us a chance to talk about the issues that we might face as young women in the world. So yeah, that was very early days.
Growing up in the aftermath of the Sex Discrimination Act, as you just mentioned, what do you think still needs to be done for women's rights?
There's still a great deal that needs to be done for women's rights. We still need to think about the gender pay gap, which still exists. We need to look at reproductive rights, which looks like they're being rolled back all over the world. We need to deal with the growth of, in some areas, of very, very toxic masculinity at a scale that we've not seen before because of, I think, actually due to pornography that's proliferated on the internet. We need to deal with things like the age of child marriage, which is being reduced in some places of the world. You could go on, couldn't you? You're going to be very busy for a very long time to come.
How does intersectionality frame your feminism, and why do you believe it's such a critical lens in activism today?
Intersectionality is the second part of my feminism. Gender equality, or rather sex equality, is the first part of my feminism. And for a long time, I think I dealt with the two issues separately, and that's because in the UK, the movements were very separate. In fact, I remember once careering late into a race activism meeting, and saying, "I'm really sorry, I'm so late. I just had to come from a meeting." And I remember one of the guys saying to me, one day you're going to have to make up your mind whether you're black or whether you're a woman. It's quite telling. So for a long time, it wasn't intersectional. It's only when I came to see the overlap or the cumulative effect of facing both of those issues, when men tend to earn more than women, white women tend to earn more than black women, and at the intersection you've got some of the people who are facing the biggest pay gap. That came later, but it's really framed the way I work now.
And have there been any unique experiences that you faced as a black lesbian feminist within the sphere of work?
I think I've been quite privileged actually when it comes to work, and I've also been uncompromising. So I tend not to face too many issues personally, partly because I tend to be out. I used to be when I was applying for jobs. I used to be very out at the very first application stage. And I work for a lesbian and gay switchboard. I do this and the other. So if you're going to discriminate against me, I'm not going to know about it because I wouldn't see it. So the issues that I tend to face are ones of omission rather than of things that are obvious to my face. So not being recognised as a lesbian, people not thinking of you when they think of lesbians because they don't think about lesbians, and now they don't think of older black lesbians. And the other issues, I suppose, are about dealing with supporting others and having that dual role of being present for yourself and also being present to clear the path, as it were.
You briefly just touched on the London Lesbian and Gay Switchboard. Could you share what that experience was like volunteering for them, and how this work sort of continued to shape your activism?
I was very involved in feminism. I was kind of lesbian by nature rather than lesbian by politics. But a guy called Andy Picos, who was actually running clubs and things at the time and volunteering for Switchboard, met me at work, and he obviously just decided it was a good thing for me to do. So I wandered along going, okay, I'll do this. It politicized me, and it also introduced me into an area of work that I wasn't familiar with, which is working with white gay men. Because I came to the LGBTQ plus movement, which at the time was just the lesbian and gay movement, through my feminism and through my lesbianism. I hadn't really encountered very gay men. And that was a lovely new world. And these amazing, mostly white, mostly middle-class gay men just scooped me up and went, "Hi, welcome. What do you need? What do you know? What can you offer? Just be part of this." And so it made me see that was another intersection, as it were. It's another way of working in collaboration with other people.
Yeah. And in a previous interview, you mentioned the 2014 film Pride, which tells the story of the gay and lesbian activists supporting the miners' strikes. Did you have any personal connection with the movement or the people that the movie portrays?
I had connections with some of the people that the movie portrays because Mike Jackson and a little tiny man whose name will come back to me in a minute, were volunteers on Switchboard, and so I knew them in that way. But personally, in terms of the miners and various other things like that, it was buttling buckets and waving placards and things like that.
Being a young black lesbian during the AIDS pandemic, how did this crisis impact the work that you were doing?
So during the AIDS crisis, the whole pandemic, I was a volunteer on Switchboard, obviously, and it just radically changed the types of calls that we got, and it made us look through the world in an entirely different lens. And we were so ignorant, all of us, not just me, but those so many of us answering the phones in those days. All the information we were relying on was coming from America. It came through the filter of a particular section of the community. At one point, I remember quite clearly answering the phone. Someone said, "I'm worried I might have AIDS," and I said, "Well, have you been to America?" "No." He said, "I thought, well, you'd be fine." And then even when he had been to America, I said, "Well, did you do poppers?" Because at one point there was this connection. It wasn't causal. We found that out later, between AIDS and poppers. So it was a difficult time, a time of a lot of growth very quickly, lots of seeking for information, trying to filter the fact from the made up, terrified messages that people gave. And for me, I grew up very quickly, I think, at that time, because we were dealing with fear and later on grief and anger and those things.
You helped set up the first Black lesbian group in the early 1980s and were involved in feminist publications like Spare Rib, Outrage, Outright, and the London Women's Liberation newsletter. What was it like being part of some of these pioneering efforts, and what impact did these publications and groups have on the wider community?
Starting the Black lesbian group was something that some of us did. We were all at the same conference, an organisation of women Nation Descent, and there wasn't any provision for lesbians in that conference, so we decided that we would have a workshop, and that workshop grew into a group, and it was the first group in the UK. So we it's not that we set out to start a group and be pioneers. We just kind of coalesced around a void, as it were. Of the publications that you mentioned, the one that shaped me and the one to which I contributed most of all was the London Women's Liberation newsletter, which was produced, I think, on a monthly basis. It was as much a community, as much a support group, as it was a publication. So there was a very manual operation. You'd have to type things by hand, you'd have to reproduce on electric random machines. You had to turn handles literally in order to produce this stuff. And I think having to be present, not being able to sit on your own with a laptop and then just send your email off into the void, having to be present with those women, having to read people's stories, and to provide a conduit for the messages that women wanted to send to other women, I think that's affected me quite profoundly. I think it made me, it created a connection that perhaps wouldn't be quite so strong with the new mechanisms that we use these days.
Another connection that I read is that there was a pub formerly known as the Carved Red Lion, which you have said has been your entry point into the lesbian community. Can you share the significance of that space and what it represented at the time?
There were other places that were my entry point, other than the Carved Red Lion. So there was things like first lesbian disco up near Drummond Street, near Warren Street, which had a black DJ and was just amazing. That was only happened called the Cauldron. But the thing about the Carved Red Lion, it was, in some ways, it was very typical of the sorts of places that lesbians went to. So it was in a basement, and it was quite dark with a low ceiling, and you wouldn't know it was there if you didn't know it was there. But the thing about it is that it was open every night, whereas many other women's spaces were open, every third Wednesday of the month or something like that. So there was the constant presence, which was important. It was also a place, because it was local, it wasn't one of those central places that people came in from all over the country to attend. It was a local bar, so we knew each other. There was a sense of community around it. So it's a sort of place that I felt like I could go to by myself, on a Tuesday evening, still wearing my suit from work, as opposed to clubbing and so on. So in that sense, it's presence, it's continually being open, it being a place where it wasn't necessarily terribly cruisy or terribly clubby. I think it was quite important for quite a lot of us.
What was the atmosphere for you outside of these spaces? Did these organisations that you worked with ever face hostility or discrimination? And how did you go about sort of trying to combat that or re-educate people?
Almost all of the groups that I've been involved with at some point or another have faced hostility and discrimination. from trying to find somewhere to meet with Black lesbian group, where people saying they didn't want women's groups saying they didn't think it was the right place for, say, for example, a Black Women's Centre saying it wasn't the right place for lesbians to meet, or Women's Centre saying, okay, we're not sure we want to host somewhere that's just for Black lesbians too. BT, which was then the post office, cutting off the phone lines at Switchboard, to I was a columnist for a couple of years on a paper called Capital Gay, to having its offices raided. I mean, everywhere that we are over the years, we have faced hostility, either from within the community, like when I worked in the lesbian and gay unit in Haringey, where parents in the local community set up a group called the Parents' Rights Group to call for the abolition of the unit and various other things, through to just even within our own movements, disappointing and being disappointed by people who aren't as accepting of ourselves and all the facets of our identity, and just making faux pas of me falling into traps myself, like saying, okay, I've decided I want to have a child, I'm going to go and ask gay men. And I want Black gay men, because I want a Black child, I'm going to talk to the gay Black group. And the Black gay men saying, you need to think about what you're doing when you rock up here and say you want to breed with a Black gay man, because, you know, that's how Black men have been used for a long time. They've been sexualized and objectified, and, you know, perhaps we expect better from our lesbian sisters. So these things are fraught with, well, the impact of intersectionality.
And Black feminist contributions to social movements are often overlooked. So what changes would you like to see in sort of this history being taught and portrayed, either through the media or within our education?
The biggest change I'd like to see is more publishing of the works of Black lesbians as Black lesbians themselves, as opposed to featuring us as kind of like big characters in fiction or beyond. I think that as British Black lesbians, we don't have enough of a record. We have a few bits. There's Making Black Waves by Valerie Mason-John and Akta Bata, which starts the story, as it were, but we need more comprehensive poems. And maybe if somebody listening there will think, okay, I'll do that piece of work. I'll go and look for the UK history of Black lesbians. I'd love to see that.
I mean, that was going to be my next question, is sort of what are some suggested sort of readings or pieces of, and to get sort of people started if they want to know more about where it began and how to continue sort of learning and supporting this activism.
I'd definitely start with the Black feminism, the heart of the race, and then I would go with Making Black Waves to start off with. And that, you know, that's the actual history. And I'm disappointed in some of the fiction that feels like it's feminist and feels like it portrays us, because it doesn't do it terribly well.
Moving along, in 1985, you founded Challenge Consultancy, which is a pioneering organisation in the field of diversity and inclusion. Could you start about how you got to the stage of Challenge Consultancy? Sort of what were the steps to launching something that has now been such an incredible organisation for over 40 years?
I never really meant to start Challenge. I was working for something called the GLC, the Greater London Council, which was an authority for a London authority. And I was working in the women's unit, the Women's Committee Support Unit. So I was a professional feminist. It was lovely. And I was there for a little while, and then the whole of the Greater London Council was abolished by the administration at the time. And I got another job in a local authority in the borough of Haringey. I was working in the lesbian engaged unit there. So from being a professional feminist, I went to being a professional lesbian, which was fantastic. But then the authority that had abolished the Greater London Council then introduced various other measures that affected local government, and it was looking as though I was once about to have my job abolished. So I thought, oh dear, this is a shame. It's been a lovely job and I've enjoyed it. And then so I said, oh, don't worry, Femi, you know, you'll be able to get a job in the race unit, say, because you've got all these other things that you can do. And I thought, oh great, now I'm going to be a professional Black person. This is just not. And nobody was saying intersectionality at the time. You know, Kimberly Crenshaw hadn't got that
to be set
term across the pond, yeah. And I wanted to do that. I wanted to be all of me, and I wanted to tackle all of those issues. Part of what I had done between leaving the Greater London Council and working with Haringey was to work together with a whole group of disabled people, really radical disabled people like Jane Campbell, now Baroness Jane Campbell, and Kirsten Hearn and Barbara Laziki, these people who chained themselves to buses and so on. And that also, together, we worked and looked at the things that we shared, as well as the things that came, the different experiences that we had. And I thought, I want to do that. I want to do all of that and more. Now, of course, I think about age and other things around, apart from disability and so on. So that's the driver. I wanted to do what I called integrated equalities, which we now call intersectional work. And that's where Challenge came from. Initially, I thought I'd just be me doing that and just be freelance. And I intended to write a sort of lesbian bodice ripper in between. The book never got written because the work, when I realised that trying to do this work was like trying to eat an elephant. Absolutely huge, never going to finish it. So I started working with colleagues, people whose opinions I valued, who I trusted, and we soon became a network of activist trainer consultants, and we're still doing it today.
No, it's incredible. You touched on sort of these terms, sort of professional lesbian, professional feminist. If you could sort of explain what that means and why you sort of choose to for yourself.
Frankly, it's slightly tongue-in-cheek, that term, professional lesbian and so on. But the reality is that I have decided that I would not, I've done various things like being a salesperson or being an advisor. And I just decided that actually what I wanted to do was be me and to use my lived experience to inform the work that I did and to shape the lived experience of others. And so that's what I mean by being, I want to do it professionally. I want to do it well, and I want it to be seen as a valid choice. So that's what I mean by slick, do it well.
Yeah. Moving back to Challenge Consultancy, can you touch on some of the work that you're doing today, and how maybe it has evolved over the decade, whether that's an increased team or different organisations that you're working with?
The work I do today spans just about every sector you can think of. I have a little maxim, a little set of rules. I want to work with organisations that shape our thinking. So I work in schools and higher education because you get people early. I want to work in organisations that shape our lived experience, so the ones that make our laws or shape social policy. And so I work literally from civil service to local authorities to government departments and so on. And I also want to shape sort of practical things. So I work a lot with charities who are delivering services to people. So that's like the approach. And that's changed a lot, because I remember when I first did my first workshops, I was literally contacting businesses saying, I'm running these things like hire a community centre, and I'd be making the tea and getting the biscuits myself and doing them free. And now I find that companies are taking the issue, well, it's integral to the way in which a lot of organisations want to work. So they're out looking for people to come and do it, as opposed to me banging on the doors saying, can you come and do it?
What are some of the most impactful sort of standout moments within your career and life, whether that's maybe both Challenge Consultancy or sort of your previous experience before you sort of founded Challenge?
Impactful and standout moments include things like being able to provide support for people who are at crisis in their lives and knowing that you've made a difference there. That's huge. It's about having access to people who make decisions that actually have a lasting legacy. And some of them things that I'm really, really proud of and I can't talk about at all.
Kind of flipping it on its head, I don't like the term regret, but are there any things that looking back you sort of thought, oh, I wish that maybe I did this slightly differently, or evolved something, or kind of challenged someone's thought?
I subscribe to the, I'm not regretting anything because I believe that the things that were really difficult for me have really shaped me and given me an opportunity to develop my thinking. So I regret perhaps choosing not to be involved in some more integrated pieces of work earlier on. I would have loved to have worked with the disability community earlier. I didn't see the connections when I was working in the Greater London Council. The women's unit was just across the corridor from the disability unit, but it wasn't really until after that council had been abolished that we found each other, and I would have loved to have done that work sooner. And I think I would have liked to have worked more with a few other groups. What's really odd for me was I went to school. My school was half Jewish and half not, and I don't think any of us had any political awareness of how powerful that was. That's little girls' school in Hackney, and how we built enormous alliances between those of us with very, very different cultural backgrounds and faiths. I would love to have been able to acknowledge that more.
Yeah.
Grateful.
Absolutely. And I mean, within this work, you've worked closely with many different organisations, including Jewish organisations. So I suppose one could say that you sort of started to sort of develop relationships with other organisations. Looking at sort of media organisations, you push for sort of more inclusivity and better representation in public spaces. How do you approach sort of sparking change within these organisations when these institutions might be resistant to it?
I've always said that the way that you sell something, and at heart I'm a salesperson, is you help people see the way in which they gain from it. You know, it's the simplest thing. If I wanted to sell you a chair, I'd tell you how comfortable it was. If I wanted to sell you a diversity and inclusion, I'd tell you how your business or your organisation will gain from it. And when it comes to media, it's as simple as this. Your job is to tell stories, whether they're the true stories or they're fictional stories, and to portray them well and authentically. And you can't do that if you don't involve people from those different communities. So it's as simple as saying, look, really, if you want to do well, then if you're going to represent the entire community, and if you don't, then you won't be fulfilling your role, or you won't make as much money as you want to make, or you won't reach the audiences you want to reach. If you don't do that, then you won't compete well with the others that are doing it. And that's equally true when you work with a tech company. You know, if you don't get your tech right, if your hand sanitizer doesn't recognize a black hand, or if your robotic camera can't follow the movements of a person with a bit of melanin in them, it's not going to win. So it's political, yes. It's a personal journey for me, and that's good. But also, it makes sound business sense for organisations to work well with diversity.
You now spend much of your time giving keynote speeches, leading mediation, and working at the board level with multiple companies, universities, parliament, and charities. What impact do you think your work has had within universities specifically, and what still needs to be done in higher education institutions regarding diversity and inclusion?
I mean, there is a lot of us working in higher education and in research institutions and things that are related to the world of academia. It's not just me. Thank goodness, it's not just me. Hundreds of us now doing that. And the impact I have seen is obviously better representation of women in the sciences, moving up to higher levels in academia. So you see them head of departments, greater leading research projects more, being the prime principal investigators in those things, getting publicised, more publications. So there are very practical things there. But it's also about changing the way the institutions work with the people who that aren't part of the academic community. So the security staff, the maintenance staff, the catering people, all of those now, I believe, are being treated more respectfully, giving equity in terms of the remuneration and the like. And yeah, I think that's a lasting impact. I don't think that's very easily going to be rolled back.
Looking back sort of at your career, looking at the past, looking towards the future, how has your understanding of activism and the fight for equality shifted over the past 3 decades?
Over the past 3 decades, in the beginning, for me, activism was put on your DMs, make a good placard, and go out and shout a lot, which I did. A big deal. And then it was okay. Now we need to lobby and write. And I think my my attitudes have shifted more towards actually, literally, the best thing you can do is set out to win hearts and minds. That's the thing that makes a difference, because then you don't have to stay with people to check that they're doing what you want them to be doing, or to guide them through it, or anything. You can just, work with people, win hearts and minds, and off they go. And you can go on to the next thing. And while you're at it, of course, when you develop those relationships, I don't know about you, but I find that one of the ways in which my activism has grown is that I'm meeting more people, taking on new understanding of their environments, and adding other issues that I want to work with to the ones that I initially started out with. It's great coming into contact with other activists.
And finally, what advice would you give to young people, especially students on our campuses who want to get involved, especially allies who want to sort of get involved in activism and sort of support these movements and organisations?
Yeah, if you want to get involved in something that is actually going to make a difference and support organisations and be part of change, I think the first thing to do is to connect with people whose lived experience is different from your own, and to do it from a place of wanting to learn about how you can be a useful thing to others. I'd say this: don't be afraid to ask the question of others who are different from you about how you can engage with them. Because I often get people asking me, is it all right for me to ask about race? Is it okay to ask this person about their religion? And it is, just preface it with why you want to do it. I'd really like to be supportive around this issue. How can I help? That's the first thing.
Thank you so much. That brings us to the end of today's episode of Yalla, the podcast of Jewish students. Thank you so much. A big thank you again to Femi for joining us and sharing your incredible journey. Your activism, resilience, and dedication to your work have been truly inspiring, and I hope that people watching or listening have learned a great deal, because I know I have. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with others who are interested in the world of activism. You can follow UJS on all the socials and UJS_UK for updates on future episodes, events, and opportunities. If anything in this podcast or events on campus have been triggering, don't forget that UJS's 24/7 dedicated welfare support line is open. You can call us on 0207 424 3281 to speak to one of our experienced staff or volunteers. Don't forget to tune in next time to hear more incredible stories and meet some amazing people on Yalla, podcast of Jewish students. But for now, that's goodbye for me. See you on campus soon.